Welcome back to that's the headlines for now. Let's get to who's hot and who's not. And it's brought to you by nobody. I'm just like used to saying that a segment, when we do segments, is usually brought to you by someone. If you like the hat, you go to Hooga House, use my code RAMI to get 15% off your order. But I mean, they're not sponsoring the podcast in any way, shape, or form, or sponsoring this segment. But habitually, I said sponsored by. I don't know why I said it. All right. Who's hot and who's not? Time for who's hot and who's not. Who's hot? I'll give you a bunch of guys, and I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm kind of going to combine the next two, but then I have two for sure buys and two for sure sells. But I want to give you a little bit more because Vince isn't here. I'll give you more than just the usual three who's hot and three who's not. I'll give you a couple more on each end. So the first guy I have for you who is hot is Luis Gil of the New York Yankees. In his last two starts, he's thrown 12 and a third innings and has 10 strikeouts, a .73 ERA, and a .65 whip. He's gotten wins in both of those starts. And those starts came on the road in Baltimore against Corbin Burns and at home against the Astros at Yankee Stadium against Justin Verlander. So it's not like he's playing garbage. And I know the Astros they've been putting the ass in Astros the last few weeks, pun intended. And Justin Verlander was terrible last night. But still, this guy, Luis Gil, is quietly becoming one of the most reliable pitchers in the American League. I think he can keep it up. He is hot right now. I'll give you another two pitchers before we move on to the hitters. Zack Wheeler, who I talked about as much as I could before the season. I want him in every league. I want him on every team. I need Zack Wheeler, big Zack Wheeler supporter. He's the best fantasy baseball pitcher. And somehow I ended up with no Zack Wheeler on any team. I don't know how that happened, that I don't have Zack Wheeler on any team when I'm quite possibly the biggest Zack Wheeler supporter of anyone. Any fantasy baseball show, any fantasy baseball podcast. A guy who lives in New York and claims to love the Mets. Now, I do love the Philadelphia Phillies also. Not because I love the Phillies, just because I love their team. I love Kyle Schwarber. I love Trey Turner. I loved Rhys Hoskins when he was there. I love Bryce Harper. He's always been one of my favorite players. And I love Zack Wheeler. And Zack Wheeler, he's lights out. And he's always lights out. In the last 2 weeks, he's thrown 18 innings. That's 3 starts. He's 3-0, gotten 3 wins, 25 strikeouts in those 18 innings, and a .5 ERA with a .89 whip. First of all, his ERA is lower than his whip. And his whip is minuscule also. On the season now, his numbers, he's 4-0 on the season now. Again, he's gotten 3 of those 4 wins in the last 2 weeks, in the last 3 starts. 63 strikeouts in 49 and a third innings, a 1.64 ERA on the year, and a .89 matches his whip from the last 2 weeks. That's his whip on the year. Mind-boggling numbers right now for a guy who, in general, is one. And my hat is, if you're watching this, my hat is crooked and I can't figure out how to fix it because it's like the mirror camera. Sorry, I sometimes get off track. And that's why Vince is usually here to keep me in check. This is going to be off the rails this episode. I mean, there's nobody here. I'm alone. Woohoo! Anyone want to keep me in check? No, it's just me rocking. This is what happens sometimes. And even then, when I'm working on WFAN, but when I'm hosting a solo show at 3:00 in the morning, are you kidding me? And there's no, sometimes there's always like producers there, but you know, when it's just me rocking, it's funny. Anyway, yeah, I should get back to the show, to the episode, but Zack Wheeler, always the most reliable starting pitcher. And it's ridiculous that he is doing it again and is like exceeding even the expectation that you had of him. So Zack Wheeler, incredibly hot right now. If you have him, you're not trying to trade him. If you don't have him, you're not getting him in a trade. I would give anything for Zack Wheeler. So yeah, if there's someone who's like, for some reason, willing to offer you something for Zack Wheeler, hey, I'll take Zack Wheeler. Give me Zack Wheeler. I want Zack Wheeler so bad. Like literally, I would trade half my team for Zack Wheeler right now. That's not a good thing. Patrick Sandoval is a guy who's available, and he's equally as hot. No, not equally, but he's almost as hot as Zack Wheeler. And what you love about Patrick Sandoval in his last 2 starts, he's thrown 12 innings, has only 1 win for the LA Angels, but he has 17 strikeouts in 12 innings, a 1.5 ERA, and a lower whip, a .83 whip. So Patrick Sandoval, we just talked about a guy who's definitely taken in 100% of leagues and always rostered. In Yahoo leagues, Patrick Sandoval is only rostered in 6% of leagues. He's available. You can go add him. And I'm not telling you he's going to be keeping this up and great for the rest of the season. But man, the last 2 starts have been insane for him. And really the last 3 starts have been very solid. If he can keep that up, bring the season numbers down a little bit. He has almost a 5 ERA on the season. So if he can kind of steady that a little bit, this could be one of the most underrated. There was a guy I picked up off waivers around this time last year, and I've told this story on the podcast before, but I want to tell it again. And it's my podcast. I'm here alone. I don't know if I mentioned that. So I can do whatever I want. So last year I picked up Blake Snell because he was struggling with command, and he was walking a lot of guys. He didn't have a great ERA. He had a slow start to the season. And I picked him up off waivers in beginning of May, probably this time of year. And he turned out to be one of the best pitchers I had on my team. He won the Cy Young Award. And while he wasn't the best fantasy pitcher, despite winning the Cy Young Award, he was extremely valuable to the success of my fantasy team last year and pivotal to the success of my fantasy team last year. So guys like Luis Heel, who's now getting picked up a ton. He's up like 15% in the last week alone because of how well he's pitching. But a guy like Patrick Sandoval also only 6% roster in Yahoo leagues. Go try and find those guys. They could be league winners. You can still find league winners, and we'll get to the buy low, sell high a little bit later. There are guys that are league winners on waivers still at this point in the season. All right, let's get to some hitters. And I want to start with one who a lot of people probably thought, well, this is the end for him. And I'm not telling you to buy high, buy low on him or sell high. I want to hold. I don't know what to do with him yet. But that's Jake Cronenworth. A lot of people thought that his time, he plays a bunch of positions, mostly first and second base. A lot of people thought that with Luis Ariz coming in San Diego, that meant the end for Jake Cronenworth and his playing time. He's taken that and said, well, yeah, I'm going to get 27 at-bats this week, have a 393 on-base percentage, just hit a couple homers, have 5 RBIs, a stolen base, 3 runs scored. I'm going to be hot as ever because I need to earn this spot now. It's earned. It's not given. So great week from Jake Cronenworth, who's still trying to earn that playing time over a guy, obviously, like Luis Ariz, who was brought in. So I'm not sure. Again, I say hold with him. I don't know what to do with him at this point, but hold on. If you have him, hold on. If you don't, if he's available on waivers for some reason in your league, he probably isn't. He's like rostered in most leagues, like 90%, and even in Yahoo leagues. But if you somehow can pick him up, maybe I'm not saying he's going to get great playing time, but maybe there's this kind of added pressure to him that he wants to have more success. A guy we mentioned on last episode who's been, so he has a lot of RBIs coming up with clutch hits, but his on base is still leaves something to be desired. But if you look at the last 2 weeks, 14 RBIs, 10 runs scored, 3 stolen bases, 4 home runs. So in 2 weeks, it's a lot of production. Francisco Lindor, and I want to talk about him because we brought him up on last episode as a guy who's been hot. So I promised I'd mention him as a hot guy here. Lindor's always been a slow starter. He always is a slow starter. If you're a Met fan, you know that. If you're a Guardians fan, you know that. So I expect him to take off here. Now, I'd love to see the on base go up way more. I mean, on the year, he's still at 283 on base, which is just so low. Even 296 is low for a shortstop who's like in the middle of that order. He should be a lot higher. He should be at least like in the 330s around. Last year, he was close to 340. You'd expect him to hover around there. So I expect him to get that up a little bit. But if this is the beginning of his hot streak, then that's good for you, for Francisco Lindor owners. I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but let's get to another one. A guy who's my favorite player. I just mentioned him earlier, Bryce Harper. He has a 600 on-base percentage in the last week. So you go from a guy who has a terrible on-base percentage to a guy, look, this is a guy who's going to have a 400 on-base percentage this year. That's what Bryce Harper does when he's healthy. And in the last 2 weeks, he's at 491. So almost 500. He has 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 7 runs in just 18 at-bats. He's 8 for 18 with 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 7 runs scored, and a 600 on-base percentage in the last week. So this has been one of the best players in fantasy baseball this year total. And in the last week, he's been actually maybe the best, if not second to best fantasy baseball player. So Bryce Harper, good to see him continuing to stay alive. And I mentioned a guy who has the monkey off his shoulder. Have you seen what Shohei Ohtani is doing in the last week alone? He is the number 1 fantasy baseball player in the last week. In 17 at-bats, he's 10 for 17. He has a 682 on-base percentage, nearly 700 on-base percentage. He has 7 runs scored. He's hit 4 homers and 8 RBIs, and he also has 4 stolen bases. How do you have 4 stolen bases and 4 home runs and 8 RBIs, 7 runs scored with 10 hits and only 17 at-bats in 1 week? Tell me how you do that. and you're Shohei Ohtani. With all the stuff going on around him, he's still been one of the best players in baseball. And a 6 freaking 82 on base, Shohei Ohtani is insane, and he is most certainly hot. The last hot that I'm going to give you is a guy who I want to try and find you these diamonds in the rough. I told you there's value. Abraham Toro from the Oakland Athletics. He's a diamond in the rough type of guy. 440, 48 on base in the last week, 408 on base in the last 2 weeks. Not a ton of power, but he's 11 for 27. So it's a big sample size. He's getting a lot of hits, a home run, 4 RBIs, and he's scoring some runs. 5 runs scored in the last week on an Oakland team that I know that big one, offensive outburst. So maybe things are a little bit skewed. But on the year now, he's up to 339. He has 14 runs, has 15 runs, 14 RBIs, three home runs, a stolen base. This is a guy who maybe, back end, you need someone, middle infield, corner infield, you could put him on, utility, see what you're getting out of him. If in a week it doesn't work out, you cut him. He's rostered in 11% of Yahoo leagues. Good flyer guy. Just take a flyer on him. Abraham Toro has been hot.